Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christinevangeyn, and today we're talking about magic mushrooms, psychedelic drugs, and their potential therapeutic uses, as well as a new legal challenge. Magic mushrooms are a currently prohibited substance in Canada, or more specifically, mushrooms containing the active ingredient psilocybin are prohibited. This is the hallucinogenic substance in the mushroom, and it's listed as a Schedule III controlled substance. Possession of magic mushrooms is considered to be the same thing as possession of psilocybin and is subject to criminal prosecution. But new information about the therapeutic uses of psilocybin is emerging, especially for the treatment of conditions like anxiety and depression in palliative care patients. On July 27th, eight patient plaintiffs filed a statement of claim against the federal Minister of Health, claiming the prohibition on psilocybin for medical purposes violates their charter-protected rights. We're joined today by Paul Lewin, who is the lawyer representing these patient plaintiffs, as well as Spencer Hawkswell, the CEO of the advocacy organization Therapsil. Thanks so much for joining me. Mr. Lewin, let's start with you. Can you tell me exactly how psilocybin is used as a medical treatment for these patients you're representing?
So for a patient who's suffering end-of-life distress and anxiety and depression, related to anxiety and depression, they would take the psilocybin, they would take it in a room. There'd be a comfortable living room type room. There'd be monitors there keeping an eye on them. They'd have eye shades, they'd lie down on a couch, and they'd be encouraged to follow their thoughts. And psilocybin has the remarkable effect of stripping away our ego and encouraging us to think of ourselves as a part of a larger whole. And for these patients during this experience, they'll tend to follow, relive or go through experiences they've had in their life and view them through a new lens. And this will go on for perhaps 6 hours. And then afterwards, they'll meet with a therapist and discuss how they felt. And they'll have a new perspective on what they're going through. They'll feel more connected to the world. And ego, and there's a part of the brain called the default mode network that encourages us to think about, compare ourselves to others, and how are we doing, and how pretty or smart are we. That's stripped away, and they think of themselves more a part of the whole. And the shocking thing is that 6 months later, people still have amazing results in which they feel so much better about their lives. And they don't have to keep taking pills. They don't have to stay high on anything. They feel this way because they have a new perspective on the world.
Fascinating. Spencer, is there anything that you want to add about psilocybin as a medical treatment?
Absolutely. I would add that just like cannabis, there are also patients and medical professionals that are changing the way they use it up. They're innovating. And so for some patients, that is using psilocybin for chronic pain, like cluster headaches. They take it, some of them, 1 gram a week, and it's able to cure an intractable cluster headache, one of the most painful conditions known to mankind. So for sure, as Paul was saying, and perhaps the most popular option is to use it paired with psychotherapy, called psychedelic psychotherapy. But the real truth is that so many people are using it for other things too, also microdosing just to improve their mood, for couples counseling. It's a relatively safe substance, and it has many different use cases, and it's being used in Canada today.
Paul, what can you tell me about the 8 patients who were involved in this particular claim that you're representing? What do we need to know about the conditions that they're using it for?
Well, actually, I'll start by clarifying. It's actually 7 patients and 1 healthcare professional who seeks to use it so that she can be better trained to treat people seeking this therapy. The 7 patients, they're all suffering severe health issues. There's one of them is dealing with cluster headaches. One of them is an addiction, someone who suffered through opioid addictions and waited many months for a result from the government, was ultimately refused, had to do it on the black market, and had amazing results. And of the others, 4 of them are suffering cancer-related depression and anxiety. Some of them have struggled with these terrible conditions, which are really an epidemic all over the world today, with depression and anxiety. So largely depression and anxiety, one cluster headache patient, one addiction, and one healthcare professional.
And when you say waited for a result from the government, that's a result on an exemption to allow them to use this for medical treatment. We're going to talk about that in the next segment. We got to go to commercial. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing psilocybin, or hallucinogenic mushrooms, their medicinal and therapeutic uses, and a new legal challenge. So, Spencer, in the last segment, we were talking about the patients who have brought this legal challenge. And one of the things this challenge involves is the exemption system that allows psilocybin to be used for therapeutic or medical treatment. How does that exemption system work? Or how is it failing to work for these patients?
Well, it certainly is. There are huge challenges. So I'm going to say that there's two main ways that can be used. The first is Section 56, which these patients have been using for the last 2 years and help with their doctors. And it's essentially asking the Minister of Health, presently that's Jean-Yves Duclos and Dr. Caroline Bennett, for an exemption to the laws. So it doesn't actually allow the patient to get, GMP, produced psilocybin. It just says that for this person, the laws around psilocybin use do not apply to you. And that's difficult. Imagine having to reach up to the highest level of government to ask for permission for your medicine. So that's been incredibly inefficient. The minister has delayed some of those exemptions over a year. So ignoring terminally ill cancer patients, that's unconscionable. That cannot be happening. And so the government did allow for a second pathway called the Special Access Program. It's traditionally used to get patients access to drugs that aren't approved in Canada. Usually that's used for cancer patients or AIDS patients, but they've allowed it for psilocybin access. And in that case, for a drug, a psilocybin drug product that's been manufactured and has a certain amount of clinical data on it, patients can get access through their doctor. And so the doctor has to fill out forms explaining why they want this special access. But the first form that was filled out took about 3.5 months, and other forms have been taking, weeks for access. So as far as we're concerned, its results, the actual results of the program, are a total failure. Patients are still dying before they're getting access. There's too much red tape. Doctors aren't sure what their legal capabilities are, whether insurance covers this. It is a complete and total failure.
Yeah, and I understand if you're a palliative care patient, you don't have years to spend dealing with bureaucratic red tape if you've been diagnosed with a terminal illness. Paul, you have brought a constitutional challenge to this regime. What can you tell me about the challenge? Is it a challenge to the exemption program? Is it a challenge to the criminal law? And what is the right under the charter that's engaged here with this system?
So first of all, we're challenging the prohibitions on psilocybin, the prohibition on possessing, growing, and sharing psilocybin.
That's the criminal prohibition.
Yes, the one you mentioned earlier, under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. We're also asserting that the exemptions that are available are unconstitutional and not providing reasonable access. And the section that we're relying upon is Section 7 of the Charter, which provides for life, liberty, and security of the person, and not to be deprived thereof except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. The key principle of fundamental justice is arbitrariness. So essentially, we're saying you're denying patients their liberty because they could be put in jail, as well as their under security. The person includes the right to make important personal decisions, such as how are you going to treat a serious health condition. The law here has been thoroughly developed in the context of cannabis. And so if I was going to boil all this down to a very brief statement, I'd say patients are entitled to reasonable access, and they are not getting that.
Just quickly, Paul, what's the timeline for the case?
The pleadings are in. Our statement of claims has been issued. We've got their defense. We filed our reply. We're probably looking at 12 months until the end, but there's a lot of variables.
Spencer, in addition to this patient-focused claim, which involves, as Paul mentioned, one health practitioner, there's also a judicial review related to Health Canada's decision to deny dozens of healthcare professionals' applications to use psilocybin for professional training purposes through the exemption system. What can you tell us about that case? We've got about a minute.
Yeah, we've got over 100 healthcare practitioners that are, quite frankly, they're upset that Canada, or the justice system, or the minister, quite frankly, has created two classes of healthcare practitioners. The 19 that got access to use psilocybin under Section 56 for training so that they could treat their patients, and then these over 100 healthcare practitioners who were denied access. They're upset because it seems as if there was a precedent set here that healthcare practitioners, like patients, should be able to train with psilocybin before they're giving it to their patients. But by denying these exemptions, the minister has created two classes of healthcare practitioners, and it doesn't make sense. So we've got some lawyers working on a judicial review there, hoping that the minister will reconsider and grant those exemptions, which are urgently needed so those healthcare practitioners can treat their patients.
We've got to go to break, but we will be right back to continue this conversation. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing psilocybin mushrooms as well as their potential medical uses. Now, I've got to ask you both an important question about this drug, this medication, and its safety. I am very open-minded. I did a previous episode on the show where I interviewed a patient, and I found his testimonial really moving about how psilocybin has, when used properly, transformed his life in a really positive way at the end of his life. But I've also done episodes of this show about some very high-profile cases that went to the Supreme Court involving people who abused psilocybin, and the abuse of that drug caused them to enter a psychotic state where they lost control of their minds and bodies and committed really terrible crimes that they would not have otherwise committed. So, Spencer, I'll start with you. How do we get the balance right in allowing for life-changing positive medical treatment while also avoiding the abuse of a drug that can also be violently life-changing?
Absolutely. It's a fantastic question and an important one to address. First of all, there is no such thing as a safe drug. And if we want to look at drugs that we know, that we've studied, one of the most dangerous ones that we know of is alcohol. And every day, horrendous crimes are committed by people who are abusing alcohol. That being said, just because it's dangerous and just because many other drugs are dangerous doesn't mean we don't use them, because many of them do have medicinal or sometimes social context in which they can be applied safely to those who are using them. So there's safety standards around them. What Therapsil does and what we are arguing for is not just for everyone to have as much mushrooms as they want, to use it any way they want, but to use it safely in a medical context, a context where a doctor and therapist are helping you not only with the exemption and getting access, but the entire way through the process. So those safeties are set up, and that's why we are supporting these patients, is we want to see psilocybin being used safely. Like Paul mentioned on the previous bit there, patients are already using it. They're going underground. And if this is happening underground, and if there are shops in Vancouver that are selling it, and the law is not being applied to them, it's not being enforced, then we're in a really precarious situation in Canada where there's a law that's not being enforced. That's not what we want. We want the law to be updated and changed so it works for patients and so that it can be enforced so that people are safe.
Paul, the same question to you. How do we get the balance right on this drug? How do we allow for life-changing medical treatment while preventing life-changing abuse?
Well, I'd say a couple things. One is, as Spencer indicated, we're advocating for regulated use rather than really what's going on out there is unregulated use. And in particular, it's going to be controlled use. So all of these patients would have monitors with them while they're using while they're experiencing psilocybin. This just can't happen with what any of these patients are seeking. So it's a rare circumstance. I understand the gentleman who went to the Supreme Court of Canada had a head injury, which might have played into it. There's various screening tools that can be used before they proceed, but ultimately they're monitored. So that just can't happen.
Spencer, what studies have been done on the safety of psilocybin and on its other potential uses? And how do those studies proceed when there's so much restriction around who is able to access the drug, including the restricted access for healthcare professionals?
It's a great question. The studies that have been done have been conducted at Johns Hopkins, NYU, UCLA. These were done in the early 2000s and are proceeding to this day. These are just the same clinical trials that most of the drugs that we know go through. So phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. Phase 1 tests the safety, 2 tests the efficacy, and then 3 scalability of the drug. So these drugs, many of them have gone all the way through, and it looks like companies such as Compass Pathways and Usona out of the US will soon have a psilocybin drug product. However, that's not without great difficulty. And part of the reason why Therapsil and why perhaps no other company in Canada has run these same clinical trials on the actual mushroom is there's not only so much variability with the mushroom. What are you testing? Is it a mushroom that was grown for 6 weeks or 2 days? Who knows? It's so different. And then it can also cost up to $30 million to get one of these clinical trials done. And if at the end of the day it's just a mushroom and you can't patent it, we unfortunately have a medical and pharmacological system set up that is not nice to natural substances like psilocybin, like cannabis. It doesn't really allow for us to test them. So there are great limitations to being able to run these clinical trials, both for the patients and substances that we're talking about here.
Right, really fascinating. We've got to go to commercial break now, but when we come back, we will continue this conversation. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing psilocybin mushrooms or hallucinogenic mushrooms and their potential medical and therapeutic uses, as well as a new legal challenge. Spencer, how do other jurisdictions treat psilocybin? For example, is it legal anywhere? Is there easier access anywhere? In particular, I'm interested not in the sort of drug restrictive nations. I'm more interested in places where there's more innovation and experimentation.
Absolutely. 2 countries right off the bat that I think of are Jamaica and Brazil, where psilocybin has been greatly liberalized. To say they're legalized, I don't believe that's always the correct context. It's more like they're decriminalized or that there's never been laws put on them, where they do allow access. And in many ways, this kind of makes sense because, this is a substance that's been around for thousands and thousands of years, and we don't necessarily need to put labels on everything saying whether it's legal or illegal. Now, that being said, there are places in the US where we may have heard the term decriminalized been thrown around. I think San Francisco, maybe Oakland, California, places like that have decriminalized psilocybin. In Oregon, it looks like they're actually creating a legal pathway for psilocybin where people are able to go to a clinic and get access. However, the difference is that this is not happening at the federal level. It's happening more at the state level and sometimes in geographical regions where, the mayor or police chief is simply saying we refuse to enforce the law around psilocybin use or other drug use. Now, I do want to zoom out a bit here too, because we can also look at Vancouver, Canada, BC, where the Minister of Health is actually giving an exemption to all drug users, anyone using, up to 2.5 grams of cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, etc., and is saying, similarly, this is decriminalized or you are exempt, the same exemptions that the psilocybin patients were getting. Unfortunately, the Minister of Health did leave psilocybin out of that. Which to me is an indication that it's not one of those dangerous drugs because the focus of that exemption is actually to remove the taboo and try to help the people who are overdosing in Canada. So this whole idea of decriminalization, of legalization, better access to drugs is not novel. It's happening in the US, it's happening in other countries, it's actually happening here in Canada. And what Paul and I and these patients are trying to say is that, we've got to be a bit more liberal. Why are we allowed to use cocaine and heroin for people who have addiction issues and mental health issues in the province? But when it comes to psilocybin, terminally ill cancer patients who have the right to die are being ignored by the minister. It's not fair. It's a bad look on us, I think.
I think part of the issue with those other drugs is what they're trying to avoid is the kind of dope sick reaction that can be caused by criminalization. That's my understanding. We've just done another episode on that topic. Is that something that is experienced with psilocybin? Can you overdose on it? Are there withdrawal symptoms if you stop using it?
You're absolutely right. You don't want people getting dope sick. In fact, personally, I think they should go a step beyond just decriminalizing it. They should be helping people get safe access, a safe supply to those substances so that the drugs aren't laced with fentanyl and so that they have a constant and safe supply. That would be the best thing. But absolutely, psilocybin too, there is no safe supply for the people who are doing it on the underground market. And so your psilocybin could be moldy. It may not be strong enough, or it may be way too strong. Right? When we don't have a safe supply of drugs for people who have a mental health issue or have addiction, they're forced to go underground and buy it in less than ideal circumstances. So I would say it applies equally to those drugs as it does psilocybin. And to quickly answer your question on psilocybin, you can't really get addicted to it because after 3 days, the effects completely stop and you become more or less immune to it.
Paul, last question. If people want to learn more about the case or to support it by making a donation to the legal fees associated with it, where can they go?
You would go to the Therapsil website, and Spencer is going to have that. Spencer, the Therapsil website.
Absolutely. Just the homepage of the Therapsil website. We've got a GoFundMe running. 100% of the donations go to Paul and his team, to the plaintiffs, to make sure that the court case is moving forward.
Well, thank you both so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having us, Christine.
We've heard today about the new potential uses of magic mushrooms as a therapeutic treatment for a variety of illnesses, about how this treatment can improve patients' quality of life. We've also heard about a legal challenge brought by 8 patients looking to use this medication therapeutically. Cannabis was originally approved in Canada for medicinal uses. Are magic mushrooms the new frontier? You be the judge. I'm Christinevangeyn, and remember, a freer Canada starts with you.